So what happens when psychedelics are used in community? And the very simple answer is it's generally a good thing. So by that I mean, people experience relief from depression and anxiety and PTSD, and violence goes down and interpersonal relationships improve. And so overall, the use of psychedelics in community is social and health benefit. And it's curious because, yes, there are adverse events that happen, and researchers also talk about that, but the adverse events are manageable mostly. And they tend to be younger people who haven't really been thoughtful about how to create a container of safety, and people with some particular personality disorders and other mental health conditions. So screening and training could help solve the significant issues that people have, the unpleasant issues that people have. So that's an interesting observation then, because we currently criminalize psychedelics. And this paper has a very simple observation. If we just stop criminalizing them, if all police actions stopped regarding psychedelics, so de facto decriminalization, what would happen is we would generally experience a benefit in our society.
Hello, namaste, adab. I am your host, Osheen Dayal, and this podcast is brought to you by Maps Canada. The podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute medical, legal, or professional advice. I would also like to acknowledge that I am recording this podcast from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Hamasquam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, which is now called Vancouver. So we have with us Mark Haden. Mark Haden is a leading figure in psychedelic assisted therapy and drug policy reform. He's a clinical supervisor for the psychedelic assisted therapy program at Chi Integrated Health and vice president of business development at Clear Medicine. He also teaches psychedelic therapy with the Atma Psychedelic Therapy Program and is an adjunct professor at the University of British Columbia's School of Population and Public Health. Mark previously served as the executive director of MAPS Canada for 10 years and has over 28 years of experience in addiction services. He's also the author of the widely read Manual for Psychedelic Guides, and now it's in its third edition and has published extensively on drug policy and psychedelics in leading academic journals. Thank you so much for being here, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, and thank you for your leadership in bringing information to the public. Thank you.
I appreciate that. So I just want to get started and say that I was making the series about how to do, or not how to do, but like what people need to know about a psychedelic journey and what it entails and what are psychedelics all about and learning about it. And when I told you about it, that I'm doing the 7-part series and sent you sort of all the topics, you were like, would you consider a discussion of all of the below? And I was like, yes, why not? Hell yeah. So without wasting much time, I just want to ask you the first question. You've been involved in drug policy reform and psychedelic research for like decades now. I just said 28 years. How have you seen the public perception of psychedelics evolve over time? Like, I just want to give our audience a quick rundown of what it used to be like 28 years ago or 20 years ago and what it is now.
Well, I have been involved with drug policy reform issue for many decades. When I first started, I believed that I was talking to generations that would exist long beyond my demise. The drug war was raging, cannabis was illegal. Any discussion of drugs had to be slanted with their nasty, evil, horrible things. And slowly over the decades, there has emerged a more evidence based approach. Cannabis, as you may be aware, is actually legal in Canada. And curiously enough, it was legalized not because of the clinical trial research pathway, it was legalized because of popular opinion. Justin Trudeau read the polls. It was, I think, 56% of Canadians who wanted cannabis legalized, and he said, I'll do it. And all of the historical challenges, things like the single convention and the international conventions to which Canada is signatory, that were held up as reasons why we couldn't legalize cannabis, just simply evaporated, which was an interesting process to watch, because it was always said we can't do that because, and that he just did it without any inclination to bow deeply to the waist to international agreements. So cannabis was legalized, and the public fear from the drug warriors was that the sky would fall in. Youth will have mental health problems. There was all kinds of concerns. None of them happened. Absolutely none of them. So the crack in the drug policy wall was cannabis, and now there's really no movement to recriminalize it in Canada at all. It's simply a non-issue, and people use it when they want to use it, and they don't use it when they don't want to use it. Now it's curious. My overlap between drug policy issues and psychedelics came together in the most recent paper that I've just submitted and had accepted for publication, but isn't available yet, which is looking at a very, I think, important question. What happens when psychedelics are used in community? Because most psychedelic research is on what happens when psychedelics are used in tightly controlled research settings. But that's not the normal use of psychedelics. The normal use is people use it with their friends and family members and community. So what happens when psychedelics are used in community? And the very simple answer is it's generally a good thing. So by that I mean, people experience relief from depression and anxiety and PTSD, and violence goes down and interpersonal relationships improve. And so overall, the use of psychedelics in community is social and health benefit. And it's curious because, yes, there are adverse events that happen, and researchers also talk about that, but the adverse events are manageable mostly. And they tend to be younger people who haven't really been thoughtful about how to create a container of safety, and people with some particular personality disorders and other mental health conditions. So screening and training could help solve the significant issues that people have, the unpleasant issues that people have. So that's an interesting observation then, because we currently criminalize psychedelics. And this paper has a very simple observation. If we just stop criminalizing them, if all police actions stopped regarding psychedelics, so de facto decriminalization, what would happen is we'd generally experience a benefit in our society. We'd have improved mental health, less violence, less negative social interactions, increased positive connections, and the small number of people that have problems with them could be managed quite skillfully.
Yeah. And also climate change awareness. I feel like a lot of people, when they speak about psychedelics, don't speak about it. But a community wide effect of what I see that psychedelics are having on people is they are more aware of what is happening to our earth. Like they are more connected to the earth. So they sort of feel more pain. Like, oh my gosh, look at all this mining and drilling and everything that has been happening
Mm,
to the wildfires raging right now.
yes.
Like it's, yeah, that is really interesting. I can't wait for the paper to come out and give it
Yeah,
a
there
read.
are people that actually research what you just said. It's called nature relatedness.
Yes,
That's the
yes.
academic buzzword. And so, yeah, there's improved nature relatedness. People see themselves as being connected to nature. They see themselves as being connected to community. I mean, it's curious because if you look at one of the questionnaires the researchers give is called the MEQ, the Mystical Experience Questionnaire. And it's fascinating just to read it. So things like, do you perceive that all is one? What? Let's just look at that question for a second. All is one. We are connected to everything. And so we're connected to all other people on the planet. We're connected to the trees. We're connected to this thing called life on the planet. That's an experience people have under the influence of psychedelics. And so manifesting that in one's lives means you care about other people, and you care about the trees, and you care about the oxygen and the butterflies and the existence of life on planet, because you're part of it. It's not just you're an isolated individual soul. So the manifestation of nature relatedness is increased concern about the environment, and quite frankly, increased
Hmm.
concern about the people around you. Mhm.
Yeah, Yeah, thank you so much. Nature relatedness. I will remember that. Um, so I wanted to ask you, why is it important to set clear expectations and intentions before beginning this kind of work?
Mhm. Mhm. Well, the experience of psychedelics is enormously variable. So let's play with this for a second. One of the reasons why psychedelics helps people deal with mental health problems is this thing called neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity actually has two components. One is the existing neurons form new connections with each other, and the other is new neurons get formed. So let me just go back a little bit and explain the concept of neuroplasticity. So if you had a stroke last night, so a stroke is blood supply to part of your brain stops. And so let's say the part of your brain that lifts your left arm is dead when you wake up in the morning. So you can't lift your left arm. It's just hanging loosely. Oh my God, I've had a stroke. So what do? You go down to your physio, and the physio tries to get you to lift your left arm in many, many, many different ways, again and again and again. And they give you homework. And the homework is all kinds of ways of forcing you to lift your left arm. So essentially, what you're doing to your brain is you're saying, I really want to do this new neural network thing. I want a new neural network that allows me to lift my left arm. I need to rewire my brain. The part of my brain that lifts my left arm now isn't working. I need another part of my brain to come online and lift my left arm. And that only happens when you intentionally push and push and push the brain to lift your left arm. And it will happen to some extent. You may never be able to lift it straight over your head, but you may be able to get it horizontally. So this comes back to your question. Why do you want to start or establish an intention? Because one thing that psychedelics do is increase neuroplasticity of the brain. And neuroplasticity works when you have two things present. One is increased neuroplasticity, but the other is the intention of what you want to do. In the case of your stroke, the intention is to lift your left arm, and you push and push and push to lift your left arm. So you take advantage of the brain's natural neuroplasticity to lift your left arm. But with the psychedelics, maybe it's, I don't want to be depressed anymore. So what does that mean? It means I want to feel more positive about life and more connected to other people. If depression is about not feeling positive about life and disconnected from others, what's the opposite of that? What do I want to feel? I want to feel more positive about life and more connected to other people, because you always ask for what you want, not for what you don't want. I want to feel more connected to other people. I want to feel more elated and positive. So you push for what you want. So you increase neuroplasticity, which is what the psychedelics do. And then you ask for what you want, which is this mental state of more optimistic and more connected. And you have to do that very intentionally. You have to say, this is what I want. And you work on that. So you take the psychedelic, and if you have a skilled practitioner after the session, when you're still somewhat under the influence but able to talk, they'll start to talk to you about your goal of feeling this certain way. And the next day, hopefully the person is skilled enough to bring them back the next day, because you want to capture the window of neuroplasticity when it's at its maximum. And then you push for what you want again. So you start at the therapist, should a skilled therapist really get the person to reflect on what this new state is like that they want. And then they give them homework. And they say, how are you going to continue to do this new state? Even sometimes when it doesn't feel right, so you want to feel more connected to other people. You need to make some phone calls to friends and get together with your friends now. You need to go and talk to your family members and have some discussions with them. So new behaviors need to be promoted. If somebody's feeling very socially isolated, they need to start reaching out, even if it doesn't quite feel right. Because lifting your left arm when your left arm doesn't want to lift doesn't feel right. But you do it anyway. You push, 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 push to lift your left arm. So you push, 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 push to reconnect with other people and to feel the new way that you want to feel. So establishing an intention is really, really important, in the same way that establishing the intention of lifting your left arm is important when you have a stroke.
Wow, thank you so much. I love neuroplasticity and yeah, love talking about it. So that was a great example of how to set intention, like a very physical example, because there's physical changes happening in our brain.
Mhm.
Um, and it's so interesting how psilocybin increases neurogenesis, synaptogenesis, and neuroplasticity. Do you think other psychedelics like MDMA or ketamine also increase neuroplasticity to the same level as psilocybin or LSD, like more serotonergic psychedelics?
So we don't know the answer to that question.
Okay,
So the research has not been done. So we can only speculate. And
maybe I
so,
can get into that.
well, I have a speculation, and it's just
Oh,
a
okay.
speculation.
Yes.
And yeah, I have no idea if I'm right or not. But if you think about psychedelics, they vary in intensity depending on the type of psychedelic and the dosage you take, and they vary in length of action depending on the psychedelic and whether you do a booster. So, how intense the experience is and how long the experience is. So, it's kind of like a bell curve. You know, the some bell curves are really, really high and short, some curves are low and long, and some curves are high and long. So, intensity and length of action. It's my speculation that the intensity of the experience and the length of action of the experience is a greater predictor of neuroplasticity than the actual psychedelic itself. I don't think that there will be a big difference between the different psychedelics. I think they all, to some extent, produce neuroplasticity. There may be some nuances to that when the research is done, but I believe that my hunch, it's
Right.
just a hunch, my
No,
hunch
I was think yeah.
is it's about intensity and length of action.
Okay, I was thinking more on the side of like how 5-HT2A receptor, which is a serotonin receptor, sort of amplifies the brain-derived neurotropic factor. And so I wasn't thinking of that in the context of MDMA and oxytocin, because that's
Mhm.
different. But
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm. Yes.
we'll
Mhm.
we'll see.
Yeah, we will see. You know, we don't
Yeah.
know.
Thank you so much for talking about the clear intentions. And I asked that question as the first question because it's really important, as you said. It's
Yeah.
sort of like a foundation to start
Yes.
psychedelic experiences.
So
So, yeah,
let me just play with that for a second. So
yes.
the intention sort of starts the psychedelic experience, and then the
Mm,
integration ends the psychedelic experience. So you start with an intention and you end with integration. So let's just play with integration for a second as a thought, because integration, the root of the word integration is integrity. So if you think about integrity, there's really, it has a couple of different meanings. A boat that has integrity with a hull doesn't leak. So it's got something to do with wholeness and, structural integrity. It works really well and it's not broken. But the other piece of integrity is about speaking the truth and being honest. And so integrity is about wholeness and about telling the truth and not deceiving others. So it's about consistency and accountability. So if you really play with the word integrity and you think about the concept of connection with others and honesty and integrity, and who are you being, where does the integrity happen? It's not just one's individual, but it's one's connection to others and the planet. So integrity has something to do with I am living in a context of community and relationships with family and friends and community. So I then have integrity with others as well. So it's not just me being integrity because I feel this and then I'm going to vent it all over everybody else. It's I'm going to be appropriate in my communication with others, accounting for their reactions to me. So I then start to care about not only myself, which is important, but also my relationships and the other people around me. And I care about how they respond to me. And I care about my family and friends and a larger sense of community. In fact, quite frankly, I start to care about all of humanity. And then I care about all of life. So it's very difficult when you've sort of walked the psychedelic path to abuse other people in any way at all, because who are you abusing? You're abusing somebody that's connected to you. Because if we're all just one part of life, how can you abuse those other people because they're part of you? So the goal of the process of integration is wholeness and integrity, both with oneself and one's relations to others, and then all of life on the planet Earth.
Yeah. That's beautiful. As you were saying that, I just was thinking of this research paper about addiction, and it has alcohol on topmost, like the most harmful, most deaths and everything, and then it has like caffeine, nicotine, and everything. And the last one, it's like the graph goes this way, and the last one was psilocybin. And when you were talking about integrity and community, and how psilocybin or other psychedelics help us achieve that, it's so beautiful. But it's like somehow the name is so damaged right now that people are scared of it. And it's such a powerful medicine. Like when you were saying it, I was just like, wow, like why are we in a place where it's considered harmful? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's, I mean, it can be harmful for some people, but like it's seen in such a negative light, and it's equated with fentanyl and cocaine and like,
Mm-hmm.
stimulants.
Yeah,
So
that paper you're referring to, I believe, is the David Nutt paper, where he analyzed harms. And it was really interesting to look at how he analyzed harms, because his harms were not just about sort of physical harm to self. That was part of it, but it was also about harms in community. It was a very, very broad definition of harms that he came up with, which was actually quite brilliant. It's just is damaging your liver. I mean, that was part of it, but it's more: are you damaging your relationship with others? How are you functioning with integrity in community? It was part of it. And if you smoke enough crack cocaine, it is reasonable to assume you're not going to be functioning with integrity in community. And you're certainly not functioning in integrity with your own body and your family and relationships. So some drugs reduce integrity. If you think about alcohol, I used to, at one point, I used to teach the Vancouver Police Department. I had a gig that I did on mental health and addictions. And I would ask them, what is the most damaging drug from a policing point of view? And the answer was alcohol. If somebody's going to start trying to punch out a cop, they're drunk. The disinhibition of alcohol is horrible for police to have to deal with. And one cop once said to me, if only the downtown East Side bars gave away cannabis for free and stopped selling alcohol, their jobs would be a whole lot easier. And so a very simple observation is that people's behavior with community changes dramatically depending on what drug you're on. Alcohol is an obnoxious drug, and psychedelics are substances and medicines that actually help one's behavior in community.
yeah, yeah. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I lost my father because of alcoholism. It took his life. So it's, yeah, I understand when somebody says how alcoholism hits a community and individuals themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's really horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And I had MJ Malloy on the interview on podcast, and he was also talking about how not just alcohol but opioid use goes down when cannabis is provided to people.
Mm-hmm.
And the second time that you're going to take an opioid dose also goes down if you're going to
Mm-hmm.
smoke cannabis. So
Mm-hmm. And
yeah, we are.
psychedelics. There is significant research that says that many addictions are managed more skillfully when psychedelics are taken in community, and that's not given by a physician or social worker or nurse. That's just taken in community. That's just taken with family and friends. Or I mean, community also includes people going to underground therapists and saying, I'd really like to. Community is defined, naturalistic use of the psychedelics is defined as anything outside of a research setting. And so that includes underground therapists as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And we have quite many of those in British Columbia, I guess.
we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
um, so I know that like it's always good to know about the myths and the risks about psychedelics. So I want to ask you, what is the biggest myth that you still encounter? Like, let's say like this is the same question that you're being asked again and again, and it's completely false. Is there a question like that?
Well, will psychedelics
Or a
drive you
myth?
crazy? Will I have a bad trip?
Okay.
Will it be a horrible experience? So actually, you mentioned two things. One is, what are the risks and what are the
Mm-hmm.
myths? So let's talk about those
Yes.
separately. So let's talk
Okay.
about the myths first. And I think the main myth is I'm going to have a bad experience. I'm going to have a bad trip. And the truth of the matter is, bad trips, it doesn't really mean anything. I kind of break that down into many different things. So the greatest predictor of a positive psychedelic experience is setting, and dosage. And so safety is the overall thing. So people who create a carefully constructed container of safety will have a much less challenging experience than somebody who doesn't. I mean, one of an interesting source of research is actually a website called Erowid, Erowid. And Erowid is a sort of harm reduction site for psychedelics, and it has a ton of information on it. And one of the places on the Erowid website is trip reports, and there's tons of them. And you can go in and search by word. You can go in and search for bad trip, and you can go in and search for psychosis and all kinds of different things, and you'll get tons of material coming at you about people who've had bad trips. And so you can actually then look at what happened. And inevitably, it's people who are either not screened appropriately, they shouldn't have taken them in the first place, or they did not carefully construct setting, and dosage and safety issues. By set, I mean the expectations you have when you go into the experience. By setting, I mean the circumstances under which you take it. And by dosage, I mean how much you take. And by safety, I mean the overall feeling of whether you're in a safe environment, having a skillfully run experience. And so, typical example, a bunch of guys get together at a party somewhere, somebody passes out a bag with shrooms in it, everybody reaches in, grabs it, chews them for a while, absolutely no attention to dosage at all, no discussion of dosage. And then somebody says, hey, let's go get a pizza. And they jump in the car and go driving and wind up in a restaurant sitting down at a table. I mean, that is a classic example of a hugely problem. That's that's not good.
That's a bad trip.
That's a bad trip. And that was
Yeah.
that was unskilled, unthoughtful um, behavior on the part of probably young, inexperienced people.
And
So,
dangerous.
and dangerous, absolutely. Horrible
Yeah.
things can happen when you do it
Yeah.
badly. So if you pay careful attention to setting, dosage, and safety, mostly people have positive experiences. Now, I'll throw another variable on the table, which is screening. There are some people that should not take psychedelics. And it's interesting, again, looking at the research paper I just finished writing. One of the diagnoses that has the greatest challenges with psychedelics are personality disorders. Personality, if you think about personality for a second. So in the old DSM, the DSM is the category of mental health disorders. The old one had an axis system. One of the axes was things that psychiatrists could treat. And one of the axes was things psychiatrists can't treat, or they believe they can't treat them. And that was the personality disorders. So personality disorders are generally by psychiatrists seen as being fixed and really difficult to treat. They involve sort of narcissistic personality disorders, borderline personality disorders, sociopathic personality disorders. And so it's an interesting constellation of mental health challenges that, generally speaking, are tough to treat anyway, and can have unpleasant experiences on psychedelics. So that particular constellation you have to be really, really careful with. Now, I want to qualify that a little bit. I was doing a training program and was talking to the trainees about screening. And I said, you should be screening for borderline personality disorders. You really need to understand that diagnosis, and you need to be careful around giving psychedelics to them because bad things may happen to both to them and you. And there was a physician who was part of the training who kind of stuck up his hand and said, I disagree with you strongly. I said, talk to me. And he said, well, I run a program for borderline personality disorders, and I'm intending to give them psychedelics. And I said, we need to talk. Can I have your contact information? I really want to spend some time with you and explore this. And we did. We had a long Zoom call afterwards. And he moderated my position. And in fact, I run a ketamine clinic, and we do screen for personality disorders. And I now have a somewhat different my initial position was don't treat them, only bad things will happen. And now I have a position that says that if they're mild or moderate, and it's moderated by resilience, you can work with them and have positive experiences. And I want to define resilience quite closely. Resilience is four things. One is the ability to have insight. The second is the ability to self-disclose and talk about that insight with somebody else. The third factor is a relationship with a therapist who you're really working with your issues on. And the fourth is positive relationships with family, friends, and community. So if you have resilience and you're really kind of working on it and you have insight into it, a psychedelic can be beneficial, absolutely. But if you don't have resilience, if you have no insight into this personality disorder, and you can't self-disclose about it, and you don't have a relationship with a therapist, and your relationships are all traumatic, turbulent, horrible things that have happened to you, psychedelics probably aren't going to help you. So screening is also part of it, and some people shouldn't take psychedelics.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, I know we're talking about psychedelics, but because you were bringing BPD, borderline personality disorder, wanted to ask you, culturally, it can look very different in different people. It can manifest in different symptoms. I even read like Asian and South Asian and Indian people showed borderline personality disorder very, very differently compared to North American population. So I don't know how much you're involved in that research, but I just wanted to ask you, like, how do researchers take that into account when even screening for other personality disorders when it comes to people of color and Black and Indigenous people? Like, how do we have enough people of color, BIPOC people, therapists who can like see that there's something going on, or do we even have an understanding that it can look different and manifest differently?
Hey, we hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. Now, if you want to support and become part of the psychedelic movement, feel free to donate to MAPS Canada at the link in the description below. Thank you for helping our mission to support equitable access to legal and regulated psychedelic medicines for all Canadians.
Well, they tend to manifest differently. They're not the same with all people. I think probably the roots are similar, and then how they manifest varies both within culture and people. But I think the root is some kind of attachment disorder. I mean, that's with the borderline personality disorder specifically. So if somebody really didn't have a good connection with a significant other, a caregiver, a mother, a father, if that bond didn't happen really early in life, and that wound then manifests in their life, and they're trying to fill that wound in a whole variety of different ways. How you do that depends on other factors, and your culture and your other personalities and your social context. I think the root is probably the same, but how it manifests varies. And yes, we need many different types of people and cultures involved with this. Everybody on the planet should be involved with have this discussion. All cultures should be. And looking at sort of indigenous use, there's many types of indigenous use, and all of that has wisdom. Whether it's the curanderos use of mushrooms, the ayahuasquero use of dimethyltryptamine, the Huichol use of peyote, or the Siberian use of Amanita muscaria. These are traditions that have been around forever, that can enlighten and illuminate our understanding of how to create a safe container. I mean, it's also curious because most indigenous use is around groups. Most Western use is 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, two therapists to one person. So they're very different models. One is more in community. One is more, I'm going to treat your issue, your diagnostic issue. So they're kind of different approaches. And I think the weaving of the container of safety that is done by Indigenous people is absolutely beautiful. So it's we all, and it goes the other way. We all need to learn from each other. If you it's not just white folks learning from Indigenous folks, but it's interesting if you look in Wikipedia for, I think it's 2CB. not 100% sure. At the bottom of the page, it says there's an indigenous group in Africa that's decided it's better than their own indigenous medicine, and they use it instead. So I think that the new molecules and working with new molecules, the wonderful thing Western chemists do is create new molecules that have different types of effects. Indigenous people should use those new molecules as well, and non-indigenous people can learn about creating a container of safety. So I think information should flow both ways, and everybody should learn together.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that answer. We spoke about the myths just now, so I want to ask you about the risks. And one main risk that I find a lot of people confused right now is the serotonin overload and why it can be dangerous. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, it can happen, and one does have to be vigilant to serotonergic problems, and one can take too much. So there's actually two issues there. One is a flood of serotonin, and the other is just feeling kind of miserable afterwards. So then it's about appropriate dosing and being thoughtful about how to do that, and not taking it for days and days and days in a row, because some researchers believe that something like MDMA shouldn't be taken any more than about every 6 weeks. So the idea that you're going out dancing every single Friday night and taking MDMA is probably a bad idea. These things should be seen as taken very rarely, and even a few times a year. And so it isn't something, oh, I really like that, I'm going to go out and do it again the next weekend. That's misusing the substance and not really understanding the whole process of integration, which is you work with what you've learned for a long period of time before you go back. And so if you just see them as sort of tools for dancing, you're kind of missing the ability to see them as much more powerful tools for helping mental health.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Do you have any other risk that you've heard of or is like really prevalent that people need to know?
I guess the other one is bipolar, people who suffer from mania. So bipolar means both up and down. So people are commonly treated for depression, which is unipolar, which is just down. But when people are bipolar, where they have challenges with both the up and the down, the up part is problematic for people because psychedelics can stimulate a manic response. And so having somebody who is manic on your hands, in fact, I've actually seen that happen. And it was really quite scary for the people around this person. This person had a full-blown manic response to a psychedelic, and was very challenging to manage. And so screening for mania, and I don't have with the borderline personality disorders and the other personality disorders, I have some nuances as when it's appropriate. I think people that are actually vulnerable to mania just shouldn't do psychedelics. I don't know if there's a qualification to that. So you don't want to trigger mania. You want to find a way of managing that, and with other tools, meditation, psychiatric meds, whatever, breathing techniques, find ways of managing that skillfully. And I don't think psychedelics play a role in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and this is it can be so dangerous, especially if you don't know that you have something like this running in your family. I was interviewing the former director of Dance Safe for harm reduction, Mitchell Gomez, and he was saying that there was this person who did not know that they were adopted, and they had a full-blown manic episode because they did not know that they had something like this in their genes and hereditary. So, yeah, scary.
Hmm. Yes.
um,
Yeah, and
the
so
next,
the
yeah.
the vulnerability to psychosis is also on the list. And so what does that mean? And do you have psychosis in your family? And how have you had a psychotic? The closer it is to you, if you have both parents who have psychosis, you have a greater vulnerability than you have one parent. If you have had it in your own life earlier on, you have a vulnerability. If you've had it recently, you have the highest risk. So how close to the psychotic experience are you? And the closer you are, the more vulnerable you are to having another psychotic experience. And so vulnerability to psychosis. Now, psychosis is a sort of behavioral term. It's a symptom. Like schizophrenia is the illness, and psychosis is what you see. And psychosis can be produced by many things. It can be produced by sleep deprivation. It can be produced by long use of cocaine. So there are many things that can produce psychosis. But if you're having a schizophrenic type psychosis that is genetic and kind of runs in your family, not a circumstantial produced psychosis, you are at risk, and probably should think really long and hard about whether you'd ever take a psychedelic at all in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. Because we're talking about the risks and the myths, my next question is, do we really need a psychedelic journey sometimes? Like, a lot of people are thinking of psychedelics as the panacea who gets everything done and they can do everything. But sometimes there are other alternatives. I know psychedelics used to be called the alternative medicine, but they are medicine. I don't consider them alternative. So there are other alternatives to psychedelics like sound baths and breathworks and all of these different things that are coming up. Do you think people should dive down and just do psychedelics, or should like really think about trying different things like sound baths or breathworks before actually going into psychedelics? But also the effect is very different, and I'm aware of that before I ask this.
Well, I don't think there's one answer to that question. I think that when people are on the healing journey, they should try lots of different things. And it's interesting when I'm assessing people for the ketamine clinic that I run at She Integrated Health. I ask people, are you the kind of person that tiptoes in the shallow end, or do you dive in the deep end? How do you want to approach this? And so giving people lots and lots of choices. I mean, a skilled breath worker will produce a very psychedelic kind of experience that can be really helpful. And so if you're the tiptoe in the shallow end person, then do lots of other things. Yeah. So it really, I think that the skill of a skilled facilitator is to offer many different options, and then really explore with somebody what they want to do. And psychedelics can be helpful. I mean, I worked in the world of talk therapy for decades. I ran an addictions clinic. And my staff were wonderful. I had fabulous staff. They were really talented and skilled and empathetic and kind and really, really good at what they did, and had been doing it for years. And nobody ever walked in my clinic, had a transformative experience, and walked out saying thank you. They had positive experiences mostly, and it was helpful in a small way. But psychedelics take the whole healing journey and put it on steroids. Now I want to qualify that a little bit, because that's a very common statement, and it's true, and people say it often, and I say it often. And there's a problem with saying that. And the problem with saying that is the bar of expectation is high. So if you have somebody coming to a clinic like mine, and they really believe that this is a one-shot deal. I have been struggling with this big mental health issue for a long period of time. I've tried everything. I've been on all the different pills. I've had all the therapies. I've done all of the thing. I hear about psychedelics, and this is my last chance, and it's going to heal me. That is a really problematic mindset, because I'm expecting a transformative experience in one shot. And I don't really see that this is something that a tool that I need to work with and understand how to work with it. I think it's going to fix me. I mean, it's a bit like when I have a clunk, 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 clunk thing hanging out under the hood of my car. I take my car to a mechanic, I drive it in, and I walk away. And I'm not part of the process. And I come back later, and the clunk, clunk, clunk is gone. If you think that's what a psychedelic is going to be like, I just take my brain into this thing and I leave it for a while and I come back, and I don't need to be involved, you're setting yourself up for a really bad experience. In fact, you're setting yourself for an increased risk of suicidality, because this was my last big thing that was going to fix me, and it didn't. And so now I've done everything. And so what is an alternative? And suicide becomes a higher risk. So one of the goals of presenting psychedelics to somebody who's using it for a treatment for something is to lower the bar of expectation and talk about it in a very specific way. It's a tool, and you need to learn to work with the tool for a while and then do the whole integration piece repetitively with a lot of effort. When you see it that way, then you don't have as many problematic experiences than if you see it as being a one quick fix magic wand Harry Potter thing that just isn't real for most people. Now, occasionally it is real. At the clinic, we do have one shot wonders. They do come in, they have one experience, and they're fixed. It happens. But if you set people up for that expectation, you are making a huge mistake and you're doing harm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it can be really scary, and unfortunately this is called party drugs, and right now we are having a harm reduction theme going on in Maps Canada,
Yes.
and we are talking a lot about how festival season can be scary when you take
Yes.
psychedelics, and can give you like bad trips and everything. So we've had like Michelle Gomez and Erica Siegel who have been talking about how having a table and talking about harm reduction with people, and things that like you are saying,
Yes.
telling them to people and how to take care of themselves. um,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
interesting because many people's first experience with psychedelic is at an open air music festival, multi-day open air music festival. And I actually can't think of a worse place to take a psychedelic. I mean, let's just think about what's happening. Either it's raining and then you're having to deal with the rain, or it's really sunny and now you're getting beaten on by the sun, so you're getting sunburnt, and your temperature regulation is all wrong. You're interacting with all kinds of different people that are kind of flowing through, some of which may be safe people to interact with, and some of which may not be safe people to interact with. There's a real intense music thing going on around you, so you're bombarded with your senses, and there's bugs and whatever else, and it's like this is not an ideal experience to take a psychedelic. It's interesting when I work at Chi. One of the reasons I work at Chi is the setting is beautiful. It's this large group room that is set up to look like a forest, and it's calm. The walls are really thick, so there's no sound coming in other than this tranquil music that we play for people. It's set up beautifully with art. The staff are calm and welcoming and create a container of safety, and it's a very, very predictable experience, and it's safe. And so music festivals may be safe, but they may not be safe at all for people. And if they're just, again, reaching into the bag of shrooms and grabbing something, I'll take this. It's like, this is a recipe for a problem. So that's why Zendo tents and there's other harm reduction tents exist, and they see people that are having real struggles, and they offer a safe environment where people lie down. And the issue isn't, you don't talk people down, you talk people through. And so you have a calm person that's sitting with you, just saying, breathe, stay with it, it's going to be fine. And they're really interesting scenarios to work in, because essentially what you're seeing is a variety of mental health diagnoses that get amplified.
Yeah, as you're saying, I cannot imagine people doing LSD or any other psychedelics
Yeah.
in festivals. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah, it's wild. I want to ask you about, so you've already touched on intention setting and support, so I will skip that question and ask you about navigating the psychedelic experience itself. So now,
Yes.
now we are like in the experience, like
Yes.
when we have
Yes.
taken a substance like psilocybin, MDMA, or
Yes.
DMT, or ketamine. um, you
Yes.
can pick your favorite and talk about how surrender and
Yes.
resistance affect the process of being in the
Yes.
psychedelic journey.
Well, let me start by answering that question by giving an analogy. And the analogy I offer frequently, usually to the question of how many times should I do it? And I think this will lead into the answer. And the analogy is a sailboat analogy. So imagine for a second that you're walking down the street of your life, and then suddenly you wake up and you find yourself on a small sailboat in the middle of the ocean. Now that's pretty confusing, because you were just walking down the street of your life and now you're in the sailboat and you go, what the heck? And so you spend all your time trying to figure out what's going on, and eventually you figure out you're on a small sailboat in the middle of the ocean. I mean, it's a nice day and all, so it's not a big storm or anything, but it's pretty weird to find yourself in this location, which is very different from where you were a few moments ago. And then you go back to your regular life and you go, well, that was kind of strange. And then again, you walk down the street of your life, and a little while later, you again wake up and find yourself on a small sailboat in the middle of the ocean. But this time you know where you are. And you become really interested in the sail and the rudder. And you go, hey, I can actually make this thing go in this direction or that direction. And you can actually even go around in circles if you figure it out. So it's called sailing. And you learn the skill of sailing. And then poof, you go back to your regular life and you walk down the street of your life again. And a little while later, again, you wake up and you find yourself on a small sailboat in the middle of the ocean. But this time you know where you are and you know how to sail. So now you notice an island way off in the distance, and you say, I want to go there specifically. And at this point, you then tack and you learn how to navigate in a specific direction. And the same is true for psychedelics. So slowly, as one becomes familiar with them, you can see them as a healing tool and specifically use them for specific agendas. And it's again back to the neuroplasticity piece. Then you ask for what you want. You say, this is what I want to achieve. And you learn to work with them as a tool.
Mm-hmm. I
So
love that analogy.
thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So how do you navigate? What is the skill of navigation in psychedelic space? Well, it has something to do with both acceptance, because some things will just happen to you. A staircase may just emerge, and then you walk up the staircase. A door may emerge, and you open the door and go through. So the acceptance and working with what happens is part of it. But there's also, I want to go here, the navigational piece. I would really like to, I'm very interested in chronic pain and psychedelics. So what is the opposite of chronic pain? I think it has something to do sort of with relaxing around the pain, because when pain happens, we tense up around the pain, and that amplifies the whole thing. So finding a way of sort of integrating and working with chronic pain has something to do with relaxing around the pain. So there's an intention. I want to go in and find a way of managing this pain that's going on in my body. And doing that consciously and going towards the pain as opposed to running away from it is part of learning to navigate in psychedelic space.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's really insightful. And I want to ask you more about chronic pain and how emerging research about psychedelics is saying that it is helping with chronic pain. And as we know that no pharmaceutical medicine other than opioids really help with pain, and chronic pain is really hard to deal with. How
Mm-hmm.
do psychedelics help with that?
Well, we don't exactly know, but
Okay.
I have an interesting story that's kind of unfolding in my life. I have a friend who has phantom limb pain. He lost his arm in a mountain biking accident. And so he has his experience of life is actually it's his right arm. He feels that he has a tiny little right arm that goes in front of his body, and it's being scalded by steam all day long. Hot. It's in front of a kettle. There's nothing there. There's no limb. It has no arm. It doesn't exist. But his experience is somewhere in front of him is this tiny little arm that's being scalded by hot steam. And it happens all day long. It's been going on for decades. So what he did at first was, there's a thing called a mirrored box. You put your face in a mirror, and so in his case, his left arm becomes his right arm. And you spend time working with your left arm and giving yourself a right arm through the mirrored box. And you just spend time doing that again and again and again. And for some people with chronic pain, it's incredibly useful. So that's the asking for what you want, piece of neuroplasticity that we talked about earlier. And he came to me and he said, would psychedelics help? And I said, well, I have no idea, but I let's find out. And so he went on a bit of an experience with psychedelics, and they actually didn't help. So then I had this revelation. Hang on a second. You've done 100 hours in the mirrored box. So you've asked for what you want. You've gone through this process of working with the pain, and you've increased neuroplasticity by taking the psychedelics, but you never put the two together. And he went, aha, hang on a second. So I actually don't have the result of that conversation yet with him, but it makes complete logical sense that he do both together and not separately. One increases neuroplasticity and allows for some movement with the new neurons, and the other is a specific treatment for phantom limb pain. You probably want to put the two together. But I have, in fact, I've suggested we write it up as a case study when he's finished, because he has his homework cut out for him. But the principle is reasonable. It's a plausible principle of you work with chronic pain by trying to figure out what it is you need to do, and then increasing neuroplasticity, and then pushing for what you need to do around that pain. And it already depends on what kind of pain it is and how it's occurring in your body. But I don't think psychedelics are the panacea. They're not the magic wand,
Of
but they
course.
can be a
Yes.
useful tool.
Yeah, and especially for pain that is like fibromyalgia, where they cannot find the source for it. And that's
Yeah.
the study that I had read about chronic pain, where there were people with fibromyalgia, and I think there was something else as well. And psychedelics showed a significant positive effect
Hmm.
um, in that study. And it was a European study done last year,
Hmm.
I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one of the side effects of the MAPS studies, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, MDMA for PTSD work in the States, they did have a side question that they asked people about chronic pain. And I don't believe they've ever published on that, but certainly someone did analyze the data and noticed that it was helpful. And and this was not the intention. The intention was to treat PTSD. And yet the side effect of helping chronic pain was observed. I actually haven't seen the data myself, so I don't know how large the effect size was on that population. But it's promising. And certainly we treat chronic pain with ketamine at the clinic, and we do have successes.
Amazing. And it makes so much sense because, I mean, chronic pain causes inflammation. And when we are depressed or ruminating, that also causes stress and inflammation. And so they both give rise to each other. So if
Mhm.
one goes down, if our pain goes down and we are healing mentally, then it makes sense that our physical pain goes down as well.
Mhm.
Um, so, yeah.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely, yes.
yeah. Um, I know that you spoke about integration, and I really like the idea of we start the journey, psychedelic journey, with an intention, and we end the journey with integration. And I had heard about people saying that integration is ongoing, like you never stop integrating a psychedelic journey. Um, would you want to talk about?
Sure. So I'm big on analogies today. So here's another analogy. So the analogy is a ski analogy. So imagine for a second that you're a skier. You go up to the top of the slope, and you come off the ramp at the top of the gondola, and you find yourself, for some mysterious reason, being pulled into this rut that just takes you down the mountain, that's pre-existing, and your skis just follow this rut to the bottom of the mountain. And you go, that's kind of strange. I didn't intend to do that, but I did. So you take the gondola back up the mountain, and you slide off the ramp at the top, and again you're in the same rut. And you go down to the bottom, and you then get in the gondola and come back up again. And you say, this time I'm not going to get in the rut. You tell yourself firmly, I'm not going to ski down. I'm going to ski down in a different way. But you don't. Your skis find that same rut and go exactly down the same slope down the mountain. And you go, this is really strange. So you go back up the gondola, and instead of skiing anywhere, you go off to the side of the mountain and you just sit down for a while and you reflect. And you look at the big picture, and you look at the mountains off in the distance and the village beneath you, and you just kind of spend some time hanging out in this space. And as you hang out in this space, it starts to snow. It's not a storm, it's nice, light, fluffy snow. It's a pleasant experience. And the snow fills in the rut that you used to go down. Not completely, but it partially fills it in. And as you get up off the ridge and you go back to the snow slope, you don't feel as pulled, and you realize that you can go down the mountain in a different way. And you do. You carve a fresh track down this fresh powder. You go, wow, I did it. And as you start, you have a sense of choice. And that's crucial, because that's often what people experience. You say, what was that like? And the answer was, I had a sense of choice that I've never had before. I had a sense of choice. I went down the mountain in a different way, and I responded to my sense of choice. So then you go back up the mountain, and again, you can still see the old rut. The old rut has not gone away. It doesn't pull you. It's over there. It's on the left. It'll never go away. You can always see it, but you choose to go down the mountain in a different way every time. And so, in answer to your question, it's what is the process of ongoing integration? It's recognizing that that rut will always be there and always choosing a different way down the mountain consciously, and recognizing that you have that choice and you are not helpless. You have that choice and you constantly choose to act differently.
That's
Yeah,
amazing. Thank you so much for
much.
that, because it's, yeah, I have heard this analogy so many times, the fresh snowfall, but I had never heard the choosing part. Like
Mhm.
everybody just said, oh, there'll be fresh snow and you can just do whatever you want. And realizing that it's integrating is choosing the path again and again, and you can see the rut. Like in most people's analogy about the snow and the psychedelics is like, you can't see the rut anymore.
Mm.
um and so this is a really fresh and great perspective on it. Really helps me
Mm.
a lot.
Mm.
So yeah, changes a lot of things about integration.
Mhm.
The
Yeah.
choice is really important.
Yeah, and it's the ongoing, it's like integration is integrity. So, what is integrity? It's about honesty and it's about connections with others. I think the greatest challenge of many of our lives is our relationships with other people. And we're not all hermits sitting in caves, that never connect with other people. We have to connect with our fellow human being. We have family, friends, spouses, children, parents, the whole thing. We have a social milieu in our lives. And it's often challenging. How we relate to other people is difficult. And so doing that with integrity is the greatest challenge of our lives. In fact, it's interesting. When I used to teach out at UBC, one of my questions for my class was, "How mentally healthy are you?" And you're bringing your issues to your clients. It was a social work course that I was referring to, and then they would all say, "Well, or how mentally healthy?" And then I would say, the way to judge your own mental health is to reflect on how you ended your last relationship. Because people have relationships and they get into them and they leave them. How did you behave when you were leaving your last relationship? Did you yell and scream? Did you throw your fists out? Did you break dishes? Or did you actually just set clear boundaries and talk to the person like they're a fellow human being that deserves respect and establish your boundaries? How did you do it? And they all roll their eyebrows and say, okay, well, maybe I'm not as healthy. So how we deal with people in conflict is crucial to our own mental health. And so can we skillfully engage with people who we disagree with? Can we skillfully engage with people who we believe we're afraid of, or whatever, all the various things that can go wrong with human relationships? How do we do that? I mean, that's the greatest skill of our lives. And it's really hard. And so constantly working on that is completely reasonable, because that particular challenge will last for the rest of our lives.
And especially in today's day and age, I think we
Hmm.
really need to work on being nicer to other
Yeah.
human beings, listening to other people's ideas and not
Yes.
shunning them down
Yeah.
if they have different views.
Yeah.
So,
I,
yeah,
I couldn't agree with you more.
yeah.
Hmm.
This was awesome. I'm gonna end it here because I felt like you have answered all of my questions, and this was the last answer that you just gave was beautiful. So thank you so much. And before I end, actually, I want to ask you, is there anything that you wanted to speak about that I did not ask you?
Well, I think we all need to be thoughtful about both psychedelics and also drug policy issues, because psychedelics are currently criminalized, and they quite frankly shouldn't be. And so I think we all should be advocating for the end of prohibition of psychedelics. And there's lots of different ways that should happen, but I think we shouldn't take it lightly. And even in a city like Vancouver, where you do have mushroom stores and psychedelic stores, we can have the illusion that they're legal, but they're not. They are subject to criminal penalties, and they shouldn't be. And so, having people vigilant around the drug policy piece of producing a regulated market, and both decrim is important and legalization is important, and they're separate, but they're both important. And I think that we should all be thoughtful about the fact that these amazing medicines are actually against the law to possess. That's not completely true. There's exceptions to that, but largely that's true. And I think we should all be thoughtful about that and promoting wide legal access to psychedelic medicines.
Great. Thank you so much. Yes, that was a great ending answer. Go
And
ahead.
I would also like to end by thanking you. So I'd like to thank
Thank
you for your leadership. I mean, you are a young person compared to me. You're a young person who is now diving deeply into this world of psychedelics, and so you will have the torch of leadership, and so your voice is really important. And the more you study this, and the more you talk about this, and is important because you're a leader, and that's I'd like to honor your leadership.
Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm really grateful again that you came to the Maps Canada podcast. And thank you for giving your time. And yeah, goodbye.
Mm-hmm. Bye.